100 princesses draped in jewels begged for his bite, yet the vampire king only fell to his knees before the girl in rags who smelled like the sun. Her blood carried the power to save their kind or destroy them all, and he knew instantly that he would never let her leave. Welcome back, my beautiful friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. They were lined up like exquisite pastries in a bakery window, 100 of the realm's finest daughters draped in silk and desperation. The sanguine ball was less a celebration and more a high-stakes auction where the currency was blood and the prize was a lifetime of golden cages. From the shadows of the dais, Elara watched the parade of crimson and velvet, her knees aching against the cold obsidian floor. She wasn't part of the menu. She was part of the furniture, a gray smudge tasked with scrubbing away the wine spills of nervous aristocrats before they could stain the king's boots. Above her, Emperor Kalen lounged on the night throne, a figure carved from indifference and ice. He didn't look at the trembling princess of Valder offering her exposed neck. He looked through her, his eyes the color of a starless void. He had seen this spectacle 1,000 times, 1,000 years of preening peacocks begging to be eaten. He swirled his empty goblet, the boredom radiating off him cold enough to frost the glass. "Next," he murmured, the words soft but heavy enough to crack the silence. The Princess of York stepped forward, a vision in sapphire, discarding her diamond tiara to show submission. The heavy jewels skittered across the polished black stone, landing inches from Elara's scrubbing brush. Instinct took over. Elara reached out to retrieve the bauble before it could offend the king's sight. Her rough fingers brushed the jagged platinum edge, and a sharp sting sliced across her palm. She hissed, pulling her hand back, expecting the metallic tang of iron. Instead, the air instantly filled with the scent of a summer storm, crackling ozone, hot rain, and blinding sunlight. The drop that fell from her hand didn't pool red. It hit the black floor and sizzled, glowing with a blinding, iridescent white light. The ballroom went deathly silent. The music died. The Princess of York froze. On the throne, the statue moved. Kalen's head snapped toward the floor, his nostrils flaring. For the first time in a millennium, the mask of apathy shattered, replaced by a look of sheer, primal hunger mixed with terror. He stood, the movement so fluid and fast it blurred the air. He descended the stairs, ignoring the sobbing Princess of York as if she were a ghost. The court gasped as their immortal sovereign dropped to his knees, not for a queen, but for the invisible girl in gray rags. He grabbed Elara's trembling wrist, his cold hands shaking, staring at the white wound as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Who," he whispered, his voice trembling, "are you?" The room smelled of lavender and cold stone, a prison disguised as a palace. Elara woke in a bed large enough to house her entire family, buried under sheets of spun silver silk that felt like cobwebs against her skin. She scrambled backward, hitting a headboard carved from bone. There was no door, only an archway blocked by a shimmering, translucent barrier of magic, and a single window that looked out over a drop so steep the city below looked like scattered embers. She was in the Spire of Silence, the highest peak of the citadel, where the king kept his most dangerous treasures, or his most hated prisoners. The barrier shimmered, dissolving just long enough to admit a tall, gaunt vampire in clinical white robes. He didn't bow. He carried a silver tray of instruments that rattled like chattering teeth. "Fascinating," Dr. Eris murmured, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. He didn't look at her face, only at her bandaged hand. "Rapid coagulation. No infection. The Solaris gene is aggressive." Alara pulled her knees to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Am I going to be eaten? Eris paused, tilting his head as if she'd asked if the sky was blue. Eaten? No, child. One does not eat a diamond to enjoy its sparkle. You are far too valuable for a meal. He stepped closer, and the air temperature dropped. You are sun-touched. A genetic anomaly not seen since the First Era. Your veins don't carry life, they carry concentrated ultraviolet radiation. To a starving vampire, you are the ultimate narcotic. To a healthy one, you are poison. Alara looked at her hand. The white scab glowed faintly under the bandages, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. So, I'm a weapon. You are a battery, Eris corrected, setting a vial of clear liquid on the nightstand. The king has ordered you preserved. You will be fed, clothed, and studied. But do not mistake this for hospitality. He pointed a long, pale finger at the window. The fall is 3,000 feet. The door is sealed by blood magic. You belong to the throne now. When the barrier hummed back into place, sealing him out, Alara didn't weep. Tears were a luxury for girls who had safety nets. She crept to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Down in the courtyard, she saw the tiny, ant-like figures of the other servants scrubbing the stones she had left behind. They were invisible, but they were free. Eris was wrong. She wasn't a battery or a diamond. She was a rat who had survived the sewers of Vale Haven for 18 years. Rats could chew through anything, even gold. She looked at the heavy silver candlestick on the mantel, then at the shimmer of the magical door. If she was poison, she would make sure she was the kind that stuck in their throats. The moon had climbed high enough to turn the floor of the spire into a grid of silver light when the barrier dissolved. There was no sound, no herald, only the sudden, oppressive weight of a presence that made the air feel too thin to breathe. Kalen didn't enter. He materialized in the shadows near the door, a silhouette cut from the fabric of the night. Alara didn't scream. She gripped the heavy silver candlestick she had ripped from the mantel, holding it like a club. Put it down, Kalen said. His voice was stripped of the bored drawl he'd used in the throne room. It was low, rough, and tired. If I wanted to kill you, a piece of table service wouldn't stop me. You knelt, Alara countered, her voice shaking but her grip steady. You looked at me like I was a feast. I looked at you like a man staring into a blast furnace, he corrected, stepping just far enough into the moonlight for her to see his face. He looked feverish. The veins beneath his pale skin were dark, pulsing with an agitation that mirrored her own panic. Do you know why I trembled, little mouse? It wasn't hunger. It was terror. He stayed pressed against the wall, keeping the width of the room between them. Your blood smells of the one thing that can unmake me. Sunlight. Pure, distilled, lethal sunlight. One cup would turn me to ash from the inside out. He inhaled sharply, his eyes slipping shut for a moment. And yet, it is the only thing in 1,000 years that has made me feel awake. Alara lowered the candlestick an inch. The dynamic in the room shifted. The air no longer crackled with the threat of a wolf cornering a rabbit. It felt heavier, like two rival nations realizing they both held the launch codes to a nuclear weapon. He was the apex predator, but she was the poison pill. So I can kill you, she realized aloud. Instantly, Kalen agreed. But you won't, because without me, you are merely a curiosity for the dissection table. Vespera and the Council, they don't want to study you, Alara. They want to drain you dry to see if they can steal the sun for themselves. He took one step closer, stopping where the shadow met the light. I am the only thing standing between you and a vivisection. So I offer a trade. Alara tightened her grip on the silver. What kind of trade? Sanctuary, Kalen said, his silver eyes locking onto hers. You live here. You eat the finest food. No one touches you. My personal guard will stand at that door. In exchange, you give me one single drop. He held up a finger. One drop. Each night. Enough to remind me I'm alive, but not enough to burn me. Alara looked at the vampire king, seeing the desperation behind the arrogance. He wasn't asking for food. He was asking for a drug. She wasn't the rat anymore. She was the trap. And if I say no? Kalen's smile was a terrifying, jagged thing. Then the wolves break down the door, and we both burn. The truce lasted exactly 3 days. They were 3 days of uneasy silence, where Alara traded a single, stinging drop of blood for trays of roasted pheasant and the safety of the spire. But peace in the onyx citadel was as fragile as the glass flutes the nobles drank from, and Lady Vespera was ready to shatter it. It began during the mid-moon banquet. Alara watched from the dizzying height of her window as the courtyard below erupted into chaos. It wasn't the usual revelry. Servants were collapsing in the middle of serving rounds, dropping trays of silver and crystal. They convulsed on the cobblestones, foaming a thick, black bile that smelled of sulfur and rot. Inside the great hall, the scene was even worse. The castle's water supply, fed by the deep aquifers, had turned into a viscous, black sludge. Vampires didn't drink water, but their human herd did, and the sudden, violent plague sweeping through the servant quarters meant the food supply was tainted. Lady Vespera seized the moment with the theatrical precision of an executioner. She stood atop the banquet table, her crimson dress a slash of violence against the gray stone, her voice cutting through the panic. "It is the air itself," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger toward the spire of silence. "We are creatures of the night, and he has brought the sun into our home. Her very breath poisons the water. Her blood radiates a toxicity that rots the cattle from the inside out." Kalen stood from his throne, his face a mask of fury, his hands gripping the obsidian armrests until they cracked. "Silence, Vespera. This is a trick. You have poisoned the wells yourself." Vespera laughed, a cold, jagged sound. She kicked a convulsing servant toward the dais. The man writhed in agony, his veins turning black. "I am trying to save us. The king is compromised. He is so addicted to the Sun Witch's light that he would let us all starve and rot rather than destroy her." She turned to the High Lords, her eyes gleaming. "She is not a guest. She is a biological weapon, and he is shielding her." The mood in the room shifted instantly. The reverence the court held for Kalen evaporated, replaced by the feral, paranoid survival instinct of predators who realized their alpha was weak. The High Lords, usually terrified of Kalen, stepped forward, hands drifting to the hilts of their swords. "Burn the witch!" Lord Vance shouted, his face twisted in fear. "Purge the spire!" screamed the Duchess of Vale. Kalen bared his fangs, a low, tectonic growl vibrating through the hall, but for the first time in centuries, his subjects didn't flinch. He wasn't their god anymore. He was an addict protecting a plague. The circle closed in. Vespera smiled, triumph gleaming in her eyes. The coup hadn't started with an army. It had started with a drop of poison in the well, and now the king stood alone against a tide of monsters he could no longer command. The heavy oak door of the spire didn't open. It disintegrated. Splinters the size of spears rained down as Kalen burst through the debris, his velvet coat torn and his eyes wild. He didn't offer an explanation. He simply grabbed Alara's arm with a grip that bruised. "Run," he snarled, hauling her toward the stairwell just as the howl of the mob echoed up the stone throat of the tower. They descended into a nightmare. The immaculate corridors of the onyx citadel were choked with smoke and the feral shrieks of the aristocracy. The veneer of nobility had vanished. These weren't dukes and duchesses anymore. They were starving beasts in fine silk, their fangs bared, eyes rolling with the madness of Vespera's poison and the scent of Alara's blood. "There!" screamed Lord Vance, lunging from the shadows with a jagged piece of glass. Kalen didn't slow down. He swept his hand through the air, and a wave of solid shadows slammed Vance into the wall with the sound of breaking bone. But for every noble Kalen struck down, 3 more surged forward. They were swarming, clawing at his cloak, desperate to get to the girl behind him. "Stay behind me," Kalen roared, shoving Alara into the alcove of a statue as the corridor filled with attackers. He became a blur of violence, a thresher of darkness holding back the tide. For a moment, he looked invincible, a god of night that nothing could touch. Then came the whistle. High, thin, and deadly. A bolt of pure silver flew over the heads of the mob. It caught Kalen in the left shoulder, punching through the muscle and pinning him to the heavy tapestry behind him. The king screamed. It was a sound Alara had never heard, raw, human, and filled with agony. Smoke hissed from the wound as the silver burned his immortal flesh. He crumpled to one knee, his shadow magic flickering out like a blown candle. The mob surged forward, smelling the weakness. Alara froze. The monster was down. The tyrant who had locked her in a tower was bleeding out. She could run. She could let them tear him apart and slip away in the confusion. But she looked at his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a shock of pain and a look of terrified realization that he was about to die alone. "No," she whispered. She wasn't a princess helpless without a guard. She was a maid who knew every dirty corner of this castle better than the people who owned it. She grabbed Kalen's good arm, yanking him with surprising strength. "Get up," she shouted over the roar of the crowd. "Leave me," he gasped, his skin graying. Too many." "Shut up and move." Alara kicked a hidden latch near the floorboards, usually reserved for laundry carts. A panel in the wall sprang open, revealing a damp, dark chute that smelled of mildew and old soap. She shoved the vampire king into the darkness of the servants' world and dove in after him, sliding the panel shut just as the first claws raked against the wood. They tumbled into the black, leaving the screaming nobles behind. The laundry chute dumped them into a pile of soiled linens, a mountain of gray rags that smelled of lye, damp wool, and the sweat of 1,000 servants. It was the smell of Alara's entire life, but to Kalen, it must have smelled like a grave. He lay shivering against a copper vat of soaking water, his face translucent, the silver bolt still protruding from his shoulder, like a jagged accusation. The wound hissed, black veins spreading from the metal, eating the pale skin as the holy metal rejected his unnatural flesh. "I have to pull it out," Alara said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. She tore a strip from a clean sheet, dipping it into the water vat. Kalen's eyes fluttered open. They weren't their usual icy silver. They were blown wide, dark with pain and fever. "Do it," he rasped, his teeth gritted. "Before the poison reaches the heart." She straddled him, pressing her knees against his chest to hold him down. The position was shockingly intimate, the kind of closeness forbidden between a king and a scullery maid, but rank meant nothing in the dark with death waiting upstairs. She gripped the shaft of the arrow, the silver burning her own fingertips with its cold heat. His hand shot up, gripping her waist, not to push her away, but to anchor himself against the coming agony. "On 3, she lied, and yanked it out on 1. Kalen arched his back, a guttural, animalistic cry tearing from his throat before he collapsed back against the linens. Alara tossed the smoking metal onto the stone floor and immediately pressed the wet cloth to the wound. His blood was freezing against her warm hands, a stark contrast that made her shiver. "Why," he whispered after a long moment, his breathing ragged. "You could have let them take me. You would have been free. Free to be Vespera's lab rat?" Alara scoffed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I prefer the devil I know." Kalen laughed weakly, a dry, broken sound. "The devil? Is that what I am?" He looked at her, really looked at her, his gaze tracing the soot on her cheek and the fierce determination in her eyes. "I have existed for 1,000 years, Alara. I have conquered kingdoms, built citadels, watched empires turn to dust. But lying here in the dirt, feeling the heat of your hand against my skin, it is the first time I have felt anything other than cold." He reached up, his icy fingers brushing her jaw. The contact sent a shockwave through her. "We call ourselves the Immortals, but we are just statues waiting to crumble. You burn so brightly it hurts to look at you." The air between them grew heavy, charged with the strange, magnetic pull of opposites, the sun and the void, the heat and the frost. Alara didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, realizing that the monster wasn't made of stone. He was made of fear and loneliness, just like her. "Then stop existing," she whispered, her face inches from his, her breath mingling with the cool air radiating from him. "And start living." For a moment, in the damp silence of the laundry room, the king looked ready to kiss the maid, and for the first time, Alara realized she didn't want to run. The citadel bells did not ring for celebration. They tolled with the grinding, tectonic groan of stone rubbing against stone. Deep in the servants' quarters, the sound vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the teeth of the rats and the royalty alike. Kalen tried to push himself up from the pile of linens, his face gray with exhaustion, but the sound that followed the bells pinned him back down. "The Sun King has fallen." Lady Vespera's voice boomed, magically amplified to reach every crack and crevice of the castle. It slithered through the ventilation shafts and echoed down the laundry chute. "He has abandoned his nature to bed with cattle. By the right of bone, I claim the onyx throne." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't the coup that stopped her heart. It was what came next. "But the king's pet is still hiding in the walls," Vespera purred, the sound distorted and metallic. "And since she refuses to come out, I have brought an incentive." A new sound echoed through the magical projection, a thin, terrified cough. It was a sound Alara knew better than her own heartbeat. It was the sound of winter nights in a drafty shack, of medicine she couldn't afford. "Milo," Alara whispered, the name choking her. "Bring yourself to the courtyard, Alara," Vespera commanded. "You have until the moon touches the highest tower. Or I will drain the boy dry, drop by drop, and paint the throne with him." Kalen gripped her wrist, his strength failing but his desperation clear. "No," he rasped, his eyes burning. "It is a trap, Alara. She will kill you both. Stay here. Give me an hour to heal, just an hour." "We don't have an hour," Alara said, her voice sounding hollow, as if she were already dead. She looked at the king, seeing the fear in his eyes. Fear for her. "Milo is 7 years old, Kalen. He's scared of the dark. He doesn't understand why monsters exist." She gently peeled Kalen's fingers from her arm. He looked at his hand, empty and trembling, and then back at her with a look of devastation. "I am the monster," he whispered. "I let this happen." "You are the monster," Alara corrected softly, stepping back toward the door. "Now you're just a man who needs time. I'm going to buy it for you." She turned and ran before he could try to stop her again, before her own courage could shatter. She navigated the labyrinth of tunnels blindly, guided only by the terrifying sound of her brother's weeping echoing from above. When she finally burst through the servants' door and into the main courtyard, the cold night air hit her like a slap. Vespera sat on a makeshift throne of bleached bones atop the dais, a dagger pressed to the throat of a small, shivering boy in ragged clothes. "I'm here," Alara screamed, stepping into the circle of torchlight, her hands raised. "Let him go." Vespera didn't honor deals. The moment Alara stepped into the ring of torches, guards seized her, dragging her toward the altar of eclipses, a slab of meteorite jagged enough to break a spine. Milo was kicked aside like a stray dog, scrambling into the shadows, his sobbing the only sound in a courtyard holding its breath. Vespera loomed over Alara, raising a dagger made of black glass. "Your blood will not feed a king," Vespera hissed, gripping Alara's hair to bare her throat. "It will water the ground, and with it, the sun-sickness dies forever." She raised the blade. The courtyard gates exploded inward. Timber and iron turned to shrapnel as Kalen tore through the barricade. He was a ruin of a king, his shoulders soaked in black blood, his skin translucent with the gray pallor of death, but he moved with the desperation of a dying star. He didn't speak. He launched himself at the dais, a blur of shadow that collided with Vespera just as the knife descended. The impact shook the ground. Vespera was thrown back, but she was fresh, fed, and full of power. She recovered instantly, laughing as she caught Kalen's next strike, twisting his injured arm until the bones snapped with a sickening wet crunch. Kalen screamed, falling to his knees. Vespera didn't hesitate. She drove her glass dagger into his chest, pinning him to the stone floor of the dais. "Look at him," Vespera sneered, twisting the blade. "Your protector."
"Weak."
"Mortal." Kalen gasped, his eyes losing their focus, the silver light within them fading to a dull gray. He looked at Alara, his lips moving silently, forming one word: run. Alara didn't run. She looked at the dying monster who had learned to fear for her. She saw the glass dagger protruding from his chest and the blood pooling beneath him. She realized then that the prophecy Dr. Eris had spoken of was wrong. It wasn't about theft, it was about communion. She lunged not for the exit, but for the dropped ceremonial knife near Vespera's boot. "Stupid girl." Vespera laughed, raising her hand to backhand Alara away. Alara ignored her. She didn't aim the knife at Vespera. She slashed it across her own palm, deep and true. The scent of ozone and burning sun exploded into the air, staggering the vampires nearby. White light poured from the wound, blindingly bright. She threw herself onto Kalen's chest, ignoring Vespera's shriek of realization. She pressed her bleeding hand against Kalen's mouth, smearing the iridescent, glowing life force over his lips. "Take it," she commanded, her voice breaking. "Take it all." Kalen's eyes snapped open.
He drank.
It wasn't a feeding, it was a detonation. A shockwave of pure, blinding white energy erupted from the king's body. It threw Vespera across the courtyard, shattered the obsidian windows of the castle, and knocked the entire court to their knees. The darkness of the night was obliterated by a pillar of light that shot straight into the sky, signaling the end of the long dark. The blinding white pillar faded, leaving the courtyard ringing with a silence so profound it felt heavy. Kalen stood amidst the rubble of the altar, the glass dagger lying shattered at his feet. The wound in his chest had vanished, replaced by smooth, unblemished skin that seemed to hum with an inner vibration. But it was his eyes that froze the surviving nobles in their tracks. The silver void was gone. In its place burned two spheres of molten gold, radiant and terrifyingly alive. "Abomination!" Vespera shrieked, scrambling backward over the bones of her makeshift throne, her skin smoking just from being near him. "You have corrupted the bloodline." Kaelin didn't speak. He simply turned toward the east, where the first gray light of dawn was bleeding over the citadel walls, the enemy that had hunted his kind for millennia. With a calm that terrified the court more than his rage ever had, he stepped directly into the shaft of morning light.
He didn't burn.
He didn't scream. The sunlight hit his skin and refracted, causing him to glow like a diamond soaked in fire. He walked through the light, a daywalker born of sacrifice, until he stood over Vespera. "The night is over," he said, his voice resonating with the warmth of the sun. He reached out and touched her forehead. It wasn't an act of violence, but of absolute incompatibility. Vespera screamed as the concentrated solar energy in his veins made contact with her shadow rot. In a heartbeat, she wasn't a queen or a usurper. She was a pile of gray ash scattering across the flagstones. The court dropped to their knees, not in forced submission, but in trembling awe.
Kaelin ignored them.
He turned back to Alara, who was pulling herself up from the stone floor, clutching her brother. The golden fire in Kaelin's eyes softened to a warm amber as he approached her. He didn't tower over her. He sank to one knee, lowering his head until his forehead rested against her scarred palm. It was a bow not of a king to a subject, but of a man to the woman who had remade him. 5 years later, the heavy velvet curtains of the onyx citadel were pulled back, letting the noon sun flood the throne room. There were no more sanguine balls, no more auctions of princesses. The long tables were filled with humans and vampires sitting side by side, debating trade routes and blood tithe laws, voluntary donations for fair wages. On the balcony, Alara leaned against the railing, watching the city below. It was no longer a silent pen of cattle. It was loud, messy, and free. Kaelin stepped up beside her, his hand warm as he covered hers. He could walk in the sun, but he still preferred the light he found in her. "They are calling it the Golden Era," he murmured, watching a group of human children playing near the castle gates. "Let them call it what they want," Alara said, turning to face him, the sun catching the white scar on her palm. "As long as they never have to be afraid of the dark again." Kaelin smiled, pressing a kiss to her hand. "Never again, my queen. We own the day now." Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as intriguing as you can ever imagine. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next story.